Thank you. So appreciate you all coming. My name's Gethin Nadin, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about productivity and well-being, or performance and well-being. I think, well-being has become a very grey area for organisations. I think we're in a situation at the moment where, doing the right thing and caring for people is great in the workplace, but actually is that really getting the attention of the board and the investment? And lots of research is suggesting that actually it probably isn't. So I think trying to find a new ROI for well-being is something we should probably try and focus on. And so I'm going to talk about why productivity isn't a dirty word when it comes to well-being. I think historically we've been in this situation where the idea of enhancing somebody's performance, putting more pressure on them, trying to get more productivity out of them, is it somehow at odds with well-being. So it kind of goes against the idea we should be supporting people at work and not putting too much pressure on them. But actually performance is really important for the individual and the organisation. So their own purpose in belonging at work comes from becoming successful in the workplace. So I'm just going to touch upon a little bit about how we get that ROI and why that's important. So my name is Gethin Nadin. If you haven't heard of me, hopefully you all have, but that's really arrogant of me to assume that. Chief Innovation Officer for an organisation called Benefex, also an award-winning author, and various different people have been paid off and won a couple of different awards. Most recently, UK Mental Health Campaigner of the Year, which is obviously something I'm very proud of. I might mention the book that I've most recently written. I like talking about it. I like talking about myself, which is why I've got a slide just about me. We are giving away the book on the Benefex stand, so straight after this event, if you want to pick up a book, you can do that. And if you want me to sign it and you can sell it on eBay, then happy to do that as well. So the two things I want to talk about today is, I don't think this is being spoken about much, and there's not a huge amount of research in this area, but I think there are these two interrelated socioeconomic factors that are going on in the country at the moment. There is a crisis of low productivity right across the spectrum. So the UK has actually recovered far, far less from the 2008 crisis, which is really when our productivity started to decline. We've really struggled to recover compared to most EU and global countries. And obviously the extremely low levels of poor mental health and well-being that we're seeing in the country and around the world. So if you saw the Gallup State of the Workplace report that came out a few weeks ago, we still haven't recovered those engagement levels to pre-pandemic. If you ask people around the world what their well-being is like, that's the lowest it's been in quite a number of different years. So we're starting to kind of realize that there's two things going on. Now, productivity can be affected by lots of things. Lack of business investment in the UK, Brexit, all these different kind of intricate things are happening. But clearly, the way that employees are feeling, I think, is playing a big part of that. We have witnessed, for most people, but especially those under 40, they've been at the sharp end of several generation-defining events that have harmed their well-being and put more stress and pressure on them. The cost of living crisis continues to kind of, as George Orwell put it, push its boot down on people. And clearly, I think that's going to have an impact on people's productivity at work. There's a great quote that says, nobody comes up with a great idea when they're being chased by a lion. And I think that's really relevant at the moment, that people are facing so many different pressures. We've heard this week that we thought the pressures were going to go down and alleviate slightly, and that really hasn't happened. So all these different things are causing people more stress in their lives, and that's clearly going to affect their performance at work. And there's some really interesting research around mammals. And if you look at mammals when they play with each other, especially in laboratory conditions with rats, the larger rat, when they kind of play with each other, if that pins down the smaller rat too many times, more than 70% of the time, the rat just withdraws from the play, so they stop playing the game. And I think that's what we're starting to see with some of our employees, that people are withdrawing from work in the traditional sense, withdrawing from engaging and trying at work because of these pressures are putting down so much on them that actually people are withdrawing from the game. And some really interesting stats about how people are rejecting capitalism and not really taking part in the workforce like they used to. And I want to talk about high performer because I think some of what we can do is actually create more high performance. And so if you look at high performers in your organization, they will be about 400% more productive than the rest of your employees. And around 5% of your top performers, or they account for about 5% of your organization, they will produce 25% of your output. So really, really important people to be taken care of and taken seriously because they're producing quite a lot of your output. And if we look at some of the existing links that we know exist between well-being and productivity, we know that there's a very clear well-evidenced link between productivity and well-being in the workplace. We know that when people are unhealthy, when people are stressed, when people are under pressure, they actually turn up to work less and they produce less when it comes to the workplace. And burnout, which was obviously a huge, huge part of the pandemic and continues to be, around 88% of people in the UK say they experienced burnout in the last 12 months. That affects productivity as well. So this pressure is manifesting in the workplace. And there's this odd thing in psychology where people start to refer to performance psychology and performance pressure. So the idea being that people under pressure can actually produce great things. And we're starting to see some of those thoughts actually start to become eroded a little bit. So we know that about a third of your organization are saying that the increased pressure that they're facing in work and outside of work is affecting their productivity. So employees themselves are saying that actually, when I'm dealing with all this pressure, I can't concentrate in the workplace. And some of the traditional ways organizations have tried to boost productivity can actually harm well-being. So 74% of employees who are retained after mass layoffs say that their productivity is reduced. We also know that during mass layoffs, intention to leave increases pretty significantly. And so those things that we're putting in place to actually improve the productivity or performance of the business can actually be harming the well-being of the individual. Overtime is often associated with stress. Offering people overtime seems like something that benefits them and us, but in the data is frequently associated with stress. We have a great example in the UK of how this kind of stuff is manifesting when cleaning services were contracted out. What that started to lead was actually cleaning went down, the quality of cleaning went down in lots of NHS trusts, and that led to things like MRSA and all this kind of stuff. So actually, employees were stressed even more because they were trying to make up for the problems that were caused by contracting out cleaning services. And so I'm going to read this because it's quite long, but I think it's an important question to ask ourselves. If short-term productivity growth has the potential to undermine well-being in the long run, and if well-being is a determinant of levels of labour productivity, then this means that productivity growth also has the potential to undermine itself over time. And so that's I think if you try to chase productivity, but that's damaging to well-being, but well-being is an important part of performance, it basically means, does this kind of eat itself over time if we're trying to get well-being and productivity? So I want to talk about that very slowly for a moment. And so I think there's this growing idea that we can start to solve this problem by actually focusing on well-being first. So if we look at people's happiness generally in life and with life satisfaction, happier people are more productive in the workplace. Some really interesting studies will come on to show this, but when people are happy and more content with their lives, they achieve and produce more in the workplace. We know that life satisfaction at home and life satisfaction in the workplace both correlate as well. So happy work lives make happy home lives. This is called a gain spiral in psychology. So the idea being, if you're happy at home, you bring that happiness to work. If you're happy in work, you take that happiness home. And really interesting research about how if you can make a father happier in the workplace, they have better relationships with their children. So kind of a fascinating spiral between work and home. And I talk a lot about caring for employees and why we should care for employees. And I think the data, again, backs up that if an employee feels like their employer cares about them, cares about the struggles they've got in their life, they will do more. Those employees that are cared for will always put in more effort and achieve more in the workplace. And so I think it's pretty clear from the data that high performance is high well-being. Those two things are very interrelated. A major study looking at this spanning 6 countries over 9 years found that to have high-performing teams, you must have high happiness. And so actually what we start to realize is that happiness is a cause of rather than a consequence of success. So what that means is happy people are more likely to become successful. So if we can make people happy, if we can look after their well-being, they are more likely to become successful employees. Another fascinating study that looked at this with soldiers. It looked at 1 million soldiers and found that actually if an employee working in the army and the navy and all these different places that people surveyed, these 1 million people, if they were happy first, their success came later. So they found that actually happier and content people with less stress in their lives started to become their high performers. And so this starts to tell us a little bit about actually, if high performers achieve so much for us, could we start to create the conditions that could create more high performers in our organization through well-being? And so what that means is you need to do more to support the well-being of your people generally. There's lots of people out here today that are going to help you with that, lots of people in the market that can help you with that. But generally speaking, the data does back up that the more we can support the well-being of our people, the more likely those individuals are to become high performers. But high performers themselves have well-being needs that tend to be over and above the general population. So high achievers are at a higher risk of burnout in the workplace. The pressure they put on themselves to achieve and be the best they possibly can be tends to lead those people to develop things like poor mental health and, more frequently than others. In the UK, if you look at high-performing schools, as soon as a school becomes a high-performing school, it automatically becomes designated a risk category because we know that pressure will manifest itself in things like burnout and poor mental health amongst students, which is, I think, pretty fascinating. And high performers themselves, according to the data, say that they need more support with health and well-being. So if we're to maintain the output of that significant group of people that are achieving so much for us, we have to continue to invest in their well-being. But that well-being has to come first. We will get the success by investing in well-being first. And so I want to talk a little bit about how Benefex does this for our customers. It's not a sales pitch. I don't get any commission if you buy anything from us. But I think lots of the people in this conference today will be able to help you to achieve some of these things. But the idea here is that could we alter our productivity futures by actually starting to invest in well-being and doing some more or some of the things that we know are really beneficial to our people. And so something that we call at Benefex low-intensity support is something we're really focused on. So this is the idea that can we help people and support people in very small ways with the things that will enhance their productivity? Encouraging more movement is a really, really simple thing to do. This isn't about buying an exercise platform. This isn't about getting somebody to run a marathon or become an Ironman overnight. This is just about small, gentle movement in people's day, regardless of where they work. So you might have seen this image before. This is from a recent study by Microsoft that looked at brain scans of people that took breaks in between meetings, particularly Zoom meetings, and then just got up and walked around. And so these people didn't have to do rigorous exercise. They just built movement into their day. And we can start to see that actually the brain was more active and people were more engaged in their second meeting after they'd got up and moved around, taken a walk, or just walked around their workplace. We help employees with sleep, and we've calculated the ROI of a good night's sleep to be about £2,000 per employee per year. So the more we can help employees get better night's sleep, the more we'll get productivity that will benefit us as an organisation. And so even if you employed 5,000 people and you got 10% of them to sleep better, you'd see productivity gains of somewhere in the region of £1 million, if I've done my maths right, which is probably not right. We did something earlier this year called the Big Mood Study, where we started to look at our wellbeing platform and how people engage with it and tried to track if they sleep better, if they moved more, did that produce a better mood, and did that mood translate to self-reported higher productivity, which it did. So that was really fascinating for us. We also know with employee benefits, lots of you in the room will have benefit schemes or run those benefit schemes yourselves. We can directly link some of the benefits that you offer to higher productivity and higher performance. Really fascinating research that came out of the pandemic started to show that just having health insurance in place increased the productivity of the people that had health insurance. And in many cases, it seemed just having that safety net allowed people to take risks, to feel more encouraged. There's a really good study that came out of one of the US states a couple of years ago, where they randomly allocated private health insurance to about 10,000 people and measured the results of that. And people who even hadn't claimed or gone to see a doctor were reporting themselves to be happier and more comfortable by just having some of those benefits in place. We know that when people are stressed by their finances, when people have got financial precarity in their lives, that affects their ability to do a good job in the workplace. A huge amount of people have continued to be stressed since around 2020 by their finances. That's got a lot worse, I think, for many people in the last week or so. And that obviously affects people's work. It affects people's sleep. One of the number one reasons why people say they lose sleep in this country is because of worrying about money. And they're worrying about money more now than I think they probably ever have. And so how can we expect them to perform unless we do something about that? And that doesn't necessarily mean pay rises and increase in the rewards we give them, but supporting them in making that net pay go as far as it can. Employee recognition increases performance by 13%. So be able to create that community well-being by encouraging people to be able to build those connections with each other and recognize each other. That starts to improve productivity. Happy workers tend to be around 13% more productive. And so what this tells us is that well-being is actually an essential ingredient of performance, but only when well-being comes first. Another really, really big study that came out recently, looking at 158,000 people across almost 500 employers, they found that the healthiest workplaces save an average of 11.5 days of productivity per year. And so if you employ 100 people, that's like employing another 5 people. So you get 5 people free for every 100 if you start to invest more in the well-being of your organization. And one of the most major and compelling studies that I think are referenced in the book, which I think really captured my imagination when it comes to well-being and productivity, is this study that looked at 2 million employees, so huge sample size across almost 400 different studies that had taken place over the last 10 years. And that showed that a significant positive correlation exists between worker well-being and profitability. So what we're talking about today is that productivity is not a dirty word when it comes to well-being. Productivity is an important word when it comes to well-being. Those two things go hand in hand. And we have some really interesting studies that have come out recently. A huge, probably one of the biggest studies in the workplace well-being space by Harvard University and Oxford University in the last couple of weeks, that started to show actually that the more happy employees you've got, the higher your shareholder return. And so this went much, much further than just finding causation. It found that actually you can drive higher shareholder return by putting employees first. So the more you support the well-being of your people, the more likely you are to have happier shareholders and higher profits. And so you have many levers at your disposal. It might be employee benefits, it might be well-being platforms, it might be all these different elements of reward and benefits. You're able to pull all of those different levers to be able to incrementally improve performance of your business. And I think we need to remember that when people perform at work, when their productivity is higher, they are more engaged employees. It's not about overworking, it's giving people purpose and belonging at the workplace. When they're good at their job and they're achieving, that's what makes people put their head on the pillows at night and have a good night's sleep. If you want to hear a little bit more, you can get a copy of the book at the Benefex stand. Some people have had some nice things to say about it. It went straight on the Amazon bestseller list when it was released. The first day, sandwiched between Dale Carnegie and Simon Sinek, which is not a menage a trois I was quite happy with. So if you want a free copy of the book, you can go to the Benefex stand. And I think we have time for some questions.